Okay, third conjugation verbs. Now, here it should become apparent why it's so important to memorize your principal parts. Just a reminder, we're learning a new conjugation, which means we're learning a new pattern of spelling, not any new grammatical information. So there'll be no new grammatical, syntactical concepts for you today. It's just a new pattern of spelling to produce the same results, the present, the imperfect, and the future, that you've already seen. So our paradigmatic verb for the third conjugation is going to be ago agere. This is to lead, or sometimes it's to act or to conduct. We actually get the word actum, from which we get act from this verb. But for now, we'll just say this is to lead. And notice the thematic vowel here is an E without the macron. So this can be distinguished from the second conjugation, which has the macron, right? Habeo, habere. It can be distinguished by the lack of macron, ago, agere. This produces different results when we conjugate it, because this E, when it's going to be at the end of the word, this short E is going to reduce to an I. What this looks like is agis. Oh, I have a hard time with that. Agis, agit. Agis and agit. Likewise, we'll see agimus, agit, and agitis. So for most of these, the results will be predictable if you assume the E, the short E without the macron, is going to reduce to an I. Now, the first person, of course, is going to be a little bit different. Oops. The first person is going to be just ago, which you saw in the dictionary entry form for this. So you can't identify a third conjugation verb by its first person singular. Its first person singular, ago, is going to look identical to the first conjugation, amo, right? Amo and ago look the same. Second conjugation is a little different because it has an E right there in between, right? It has habeo, but not so with the third conjugation, where it's like ago, deco, other third conjugation verbs will be just the simple O. The other place where you have a little bit of weirdness is the third person plural. We saw already when we talked about the futures that Latin prefers not, there'll be exceptions to this, but prefers not to go int, so instead of going instead of saying agint, you get agunt. A-G-U-N-T. So you'd expect this to be an I, like agis, aget, agimus, agistus, but here you get agunt. Okay, so that's not too tough. You have your changes for the present tense endings. The difficult part about this is actually the future. The imperfect is basically going to be predictable. Let's do the imperfect first. You get that E from agere, right? That's your thematic vowel, even though it changes to an I for the present tense endings. You get this E, and then you attach your BA plus endings. Agebam, agebas, agebat, agebamus, agebatis, agebant. Exactly what you'd expect for an imperfect tense verb. So it's not going to be an I, it's going to be an E, which is the thematic vowel, which you get from the infinitive, your ba, your tense infix, and your endings. So you got your AG stem, your E thematic vowel for the third person, for the third conjugation, your BA infix for the imperfect tense, and your personal endings, OST, mustus, int, except for an O, you have an M. Okay. So present and imperfect is pretty predictable. The future, what you'd expect is a BI. And here's where Latin is going to throw you for a loop. Instead of being a BI, which is what you'd expect, the I-B-I construction, which is what you'd expect, right? That's going to reduce down just to an E. You're going to get the E that you're used to seeing, for instance, in like a second conjugation verb. You have an E here, right? So habes, habet, habemos, habetis, that's an E. For third conjugation verbs, that E is the sign of the future because it's an I in the present. So aget is he will lead, while because agit is he is leading. You have your present tense with an I and your future with an E. Similarly, we have ages, agis. Present tense down here with the I, because that E shortens to an I in the present tense, and es is your future tense. The hardest part of this is actually recognizing this, because you're going to see something like agemus. And to recognize that this is a future, you need to remember that ago, agere is third conjugation. So you're expecting a third conjugation present to be agimus. And what you have instead is agemus, putting you into the future tense. So to do this correctly, you need to be able to see this, think of what the principal parts are, realize this is a third conjugation, and so the E puts you in the future rather than in the present tense the way it does with second conjugation. Now, there are a few weirdnesses, a few unexpected features perhaps, with these verbs. The first is the first person singular. This is totally unpredictable to you now. You don't have the information to make sense of this. What's actually happening is, for purposes of disambiguation, the first person singular future tense verb is borrowing the subjunctive ending. So these are things beyond your ken at this point. We'll learn about the subjunctive way down the road. But you're getting a first person singular that, based on what you know now, doesn't make any morphological sense. There's no rules of spelling that would explain why this is an A. For now, you just need to memorize that the first person singular future ending of third conjugation verbs is am. This would be bo for all others, right? You'd expect this to be bo, amabo, habebo. But instead here you get am, the subjunctive first person singular, to complete the first person singular future of third conjugations. So for now, just remember that am is your future first person singular for only third conjugations. In first and second conjugations, it's bo. The other weirdo is your well, actually, the rest are all predictable. Agemus, agetis, and agent. I was thinking third person plural is a little weird, ent, but it's actually exactly what you'd expect. It's just that we've programmed ourselves to expect bunt because bi is the infix. So third person plural ent is actually perfectly predictable if you remember that we're using an e for the future. Despite the fact that in the first and second conjugations, the third person future is bunt. Okay, last few rules to learn, or principles to learn, is the imperative. The imperative is going to be age, which is exactly what you should expect it to be, right? So it reduces down to just its thematic vowel. So ama is to love because amo amare. Habe is to the command hold. Tene, hold. Take, hold. Salve, be healthy. Because of second conjugation verbs, the thematic vowel is the long E. This is exactly what it's expected to be. You get just the E because E is the thematic vowel, right? So it's going to look a lot like a second conjugation imperative. The only wrinkle here is that when you go into the plural, it goes back to the being that I, because it's not right at the end. You have another vowel, agite. So here we have ite as a second person plural imperative, the command, y'all lead, I guess. So, this isn't that hard. There's basically two principles and then a few wrinkles. The principles are that the third conjugation can be recognized from the short E in the infinitive. So ago, agere, dico, dicere. That short E becomes an I in the present tense. So agis, agit, agimus, agitus. And it lengthens back to an E for the future. Instead of having bi as your future tense infix, you get the E that you might have expected all along. The result is that third conjugation futures look like second conjugation presents. Let me show you one example of that before we leave. Habes, you are, present tense, having. Agis would be the present tense. You are leading. But if we're going to make it future, we get ages. This is a second conjugation present. Future would be habebis, right? Habes, second conjugation present, and a third conjugation future. Present would be agis. So the third conjugation future looks like a second conjugation present. You need to memorize which conjugation your nouns belong to so that you can recognize, you can distinguish the present from the future for third conjugation verbs.